comprehend, because the professors will just zoom right by you, and then you'll get this big F at the end of your semesters. To understand, so it's a verb, means it does something. It does action. It says to grasp the meaning and reasonableness of something real or imagined. Can you imagine if you saw the scribbles that Einstein wrote down on his theory of relativity? You'd have thought, if you couldn't understand it, what's this bunch of gobbledygook? What's that got to do with me? Is this how you make ice cream? And here we are 120-something years later, and we're still seeing that Einstein, most of the time, was absolutely right about these little scribblings on a piece of paper. Because we came to understand what this man imagined in his mind a long time ago about something that we can't even see. When's the last time you saw a light ray? Right now. Right now. You think about that. Speed of light's like 186,000 miles per second. Can you imagine how heavy that little photon head would have to be to keep from smashing into your eyeball and ruining your eye? There's some physics, a little bit of physical things for you to think about. Eyes are a terrific thing, isn't it? How about your ear, how your ear works? Sound only moves at like 770-something feet per second at sea level under normal temperatures. You can go on and on with all these definitions, but to be able to comprehend and understand what? Well, right here, we're here because you want to try to understand what this says to you. What does this say to you? What have we been calling this thing, or what have we been calling this thing for a couple of months now? The instruction manual. Instruction manual for what? How to save yourself. Okay? You think it was just given just because, let's just write this big old book. See how many people will follow this. What was it? What was its purpose? Remember, for those of you who've been in the class for a long time, what is our specific purpose as a human being? From word go to the end of our word go is done. To prove what? To who? To what entity? Well, here we go back to that Greek word. Learned it from Kelley. Doulos is scattered all through Scripture. Doulos means servant. It means bondservant. It means slave. How faithful are you? How true to this book are you? Are you willing to sacrifice some of self to get where the book promises? Doulos. So, let's just pick up in verse 1 in John chapter 8. And word of warning, this is a bit of an adult topic. I think most everybody in here is an adult and understands things. So when we get to a certain part of this, I want to give explanations for things because it's scripturally correct to know what's been said about this topic by our Creator. Chapter 8, verse 1. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him, and he sat down and began to make them understand, to teach them. Okay? Right now, when I'm reading from this, what is it trying to do for you? It's trying to teach. It's trying to give you understanding. It is a simple concept, but a lot of times we as human beings want to overcomplicate things. The simplicity gets lost in the fog of details. But sometimes details are important. And this brings me to something else I used to teach on. And those of you who've been listening to me for years may remember I used a car accident at a four-way stop. Four-way stop means everybody's got to come to a stop. There's a crossing the road, and there's an intersection right out in the middle, and there's a car wreck. And there's four people standing on each corner, or one corner as a person and another. So there's four people, four witnesses to this. Four witnesses see the same wreck, but from what perspective? If you're standing over there, and this person's standing over there, what do they see in the car wreck? Well, what about these two over here? What do they see? And then what about the other two that were involved in the car wreck? If there were two cars. Maybe a guy just come up to a stop sign and jammed on the brakes too hard and the car rolled over. It was an accident. But everybody sees the same thing, but they see a slightly different perspective. So how do you sort that out? Well, you could use math. What does 2 plus 2 equal? It's a given. It's a truth set. You can't change it. It means exactly what it means. It means 7. Doesn't it? Well, wait a minute, Roberts, you're incorrect about that. Everybody knows it means 3. Well, you're still incorrect. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay? It's an unchangeable truth. How much has this been changed through the last couple of thousand years? A lot. Back and forth we go with this. What is truth? Your truth isn't as truthful as my truth. Well, what sets the standard? This does right here. So through understanding and understanding your perspective on this. What's your perspective? Well, I'll just take what I like, throw out the rest. That's good enough. God will understand. So, let's go back to verse 1 again. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the afternoon, whoa, wait a minute, what does that say? Early in the morning, he came again into the temple. He came again? Wow, where's he been before? He came again into the temple. What kind of clue did it give us about this? When did he come? Early in the morning? Had he ever been there before? Yes, he had. See the two clues that are given? This goes into our understanding. It's like trying to pack a balloon with as much as you possibly can to give as much definition to what the point is trying to be made. And why am I saying all this? Because you as a Christian should be able to give an answer for why you believe what you believe. Well, how do you back that up? Well, I got baptized. That's all I need. What about if you've got a good friend and you really, really would like to see that good friend change their behavior in life? How can you impress your friend? Can you impress him with mathematics? How are young children being impressed these days? My son-in-law in Arizona with our first grandchild had been taking this little six-month-old baby to two libraries. He'd been taking her to the libraries. They were offering these little programs. So he went to a third library on Friday. The first thing he saw was a woman reading from a book about homosexuals and how to be nice to homosexuals and all these other sort of things. And then there's other books in there teaching all these other things that all we got to do is listen a little bit to the news and see what kind of controversies these are bringing up. Well, what's the point in that? Who's trying to impress who with what here? Where has this lost its power? Along the way, it started being taught not very well. A lot of things are left out. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes unknowingly. It's like me. The more I study this, the more I realize how much I do not know. And I'm not talking about N-O. I'm talking about K-N-O-W. So to know. So let's go again. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came into the temple, and all the people were coming to him, and he sat down and began to teach. Well, you might pose a question. Why were all of the people coming to hear him teach? Who had been teaching before? Right now, if you listen to the news, most of the mainstream news out there, it's all happy and good. We need to force this stuff on these kids. Don't you know these kids don't know nothing? We got to raise them up right to where they're totally confused by the time they're 6. They don't know which way's up or down or sideways. How do you combat that? Do you do it by sounding foolish, by trying to teach Scripture? Or can you present this in such a fashion as to where it's understandable and the meaning and the impact that it should present? Well, apparently, in this statement, it says here, and all the people were coming to him. Why? Because he was teaching it the way it was supposed to be taught. Because he knew his subject matter. He knew how to apply it. He knew the psychology of why you apply it. And he sat down and began to teach them. Verse 3. The scribes and the Pharisees. Anybody in here want to tell me what a scribe is? Yeah, usually if they're going to write something down, they're copying a text or scripture. In particular, that's where scribes really get their origin. What is a scribe supposed to do? If he sees the word C-A-T, does he write it down as D-O-G? What's he supposed to do? He's supposed to write C-A-T as C-A-T. Or could he supplant it with F-E-L-I-N-E? What's a feline anyway? But the Scripture says cat. Well, you write down cat. You don't supplant it with what you think you want to put in there. You put it in there for what it's supposed to be. That's why they're scribes. And they're supposed to understand what they're writing down also. That's another thing about this. The scribes and the Pharisees. Now, who are the Pharisees? These were the priests, right? The priest can't question what the priests say. They even write laws for us, don't they? Whether they're good, bad, or otherwise, especially the ones on Sunday. You're lucky they didn't write a law that says you can't breathe on Sunday. Or if you do, you got to breathe out of your left nostril every other minute. Some silly something like that. Some of these crazy notions they came up with. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. Now, what is adultery? Here comes the sticky part of the lesson this morning. But what is it? Where are we reading about this? Right here in the pages of Scripture. What is adultery? What is fornication? Can anybody tell me the difference between the two? There is a difference. What does adultery pertain to? Marriage. Exactly. Marriage. Marriage between a dog and a man. What is marriage supposed to be? Between a man and a woman. What's being taught these days? Hey, you can get married to a tree if you want to. I mean, you see the absurdity of what's going on with this? And how impressionable. What does this do to a young man, young mind somewhere? Rooted in confusion. Well, who is the author of confusion? 3rd chapter in Genesis gets into confusion right then and there. Oh, no, you won't die. Oh, what do you mean you won't die? No, you won't die. Go ahead. Take a bite. Confusion led to what? Confusion will lead to your own death, our own death. You've got to be able to comprehend. You've got to be able to understand. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. Where's the man? Why did they bring just the woman? See the little ploy? They supply you with just enough information to get you thinking one particular way. You see this? For you teenagers, Listen to how your teachers present what they should be presenting, especially if you'll study it and know whether your professors are doing it right or not. I distinctly remember one professor I had, Maxine Piper, college history class. And I'm lucky I got out of that class just with a very, very low C. I think she gave me a 70, just enough to pass. But I was one of the few students that would put my hand up and question some of these things that she was putting out there, which I realized straight out of the Communist Handbook. And that's in the 1970s. How did I know that? Because I had some high school teachers that taught us some good things, proper things, things to look out for. Civics teachers. I wonder how good some of the civics teachers are we have now, if they even teach civics anymore. Because the Methodists were changing what they thought they were, needed to be teaching. I read about that also. The Baptists have lost, I think, something on the order of 12 million.
Accepting women as
Yeah.
pastors and
Yeah. And I know some of the people that were loyal to the old school Baptists, there's something to the tune of like 12 million people have left the Southern Baptist thing, which used to be the strictest of the strict. But now, we can't have that. So these scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. Well, it's time to look up and see just, what is this thing? Let's get clarification of terms, to use technical stuff. Clarification of terms. What is the difference between fornication and adultery? Well, adultery is a noun, person, place, or a thing. He says a sexual encounter or relationship between a married person and someone other than their spouse. What's one of the bad things about adultery, other than just what the two participants are doing? How does it affect the third party that doesn't know what's going on? How do you think that would happen to you? Let's say you got a boyfriend and he's out hooting around with some old gal the night before he's got a date with you. And then you find out about it just before the date. How are you going to treat that person when they come and knocking on the door to pick you up? Or maybe these days they just text you and say, I'm outside waiting for you. How are you going to feel? Especially if the heartstrings are pulling on you. Kind of like, I got to where I really like this person. This man, this girl. What's happened there? What's happened there? Loss of what? Starts with a T and ends with a T. Trust. Deceit enters into the picture, doesn't it? Can I pick you up and throw you as far as I can trust you? Can I trust you once that car turns the corner and I don't see you anymore? You said you went to the store to buy a loaf of bread. You were gone for 5 hours. How heavy was that bread? Gee whiz. Did you have to walk home with it behind a little red wagon? Scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. We'll come to the next part in just a moment. There's another part, but it's a defining difference between adultery and what is fornication. And here we get into a sticky wicket in the definition on this. Fornication is also a noun, person, place, or a thing. This is straight out of the dictionary. Consensual, mutual consent, sexual going all the way. I'll just put it that way. Sexual going all the way between two persons not married to each other. Not married to each other. Now, next time that you read Scripture, hopefully these meanings will come to your mind, because we see definitions in here between adultery and fornication. But are either one of the two approved? Is it the right thing to be doing? See, now you can start pulling real fine gnat hairs out of this thing. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. And having set her in the center of the court, why do you think they set her in the center of the court? Center of attention. Well, part of it's humiliation on her part, but it was to prove a point. Right here, this one right here, right in the middle. She's got the microphone, so to speak. Pay attention. Now listen to us. Having set her in the center of the court, and remember, there's a crowd around. They'd been listening. Having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, "Teacher," there's that word teacher. What did Christ do most of the time? Most of recorded history in here teaches us that he was a teacher. What are we supposed to be? We supposed to just sit silent and not say a word to our friends? Sometimes we don't say it because we don't want to lose their friendship. I've learned through the years there are certain ways you can pick your moments. And sometimes those moments make a difference. Don't they, Isaac? Scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act." In the very act. We walked in on this deal. We? Huh. How many in here recognize the trap that these guys are setting? Especially for this woman, but also for Jesus. Let's go a little further then. "Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act. Now, in the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. What then do you say?" And Scripture is very explicit with the next sentence. They were saying this, testing him. It was a trap. What if he had said the wrong thing? What if he had said the wrong thing? They were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. Accusing him of what? Aha. You don't know what you're talking about. Or were they saying, what are we going to do? What are you going to do to this woman? But the word is used as an accusation, accusing him. I accuse you of stealing my car last night at midnight and going and filling the gas tank plumb full of gas and then bringing it back. You just stand there dumbfounded. You think I'd spend that much money on you in the first place? Much less risking having the cops being called and being caught. I mean, some nonsense like this. But this is a serious accusation for these people, because what had Jesus been doing previous to this with the Pharisees and the scribes? Well, for lack of a better term, he quite literally had been toying with them. I can't say that that's the right term to use. But did they ever best Jesus in an argument? Why do you think it would be that way? Let's go back to what actually began this lesson. Remember, what was it in Luke 3, Luke 2? I don't have exact recall on it, but he went and he was left behind, and his parents came back to pick him up. What did it say about the teachers? How they were amazed at his knowledge? In fact, they were sitting back and listening to him. He quite literally was teaching the teachers. And how old was he? 12 years old. And his parents came and said, "What are you doing?" "I got to be about my Father's business." And his parents didn't understand. He was 12 years old. They had raised him from a baby. Mary had been told that this is a special child. But they didn't understand. Why not? Had they not been paying attention? I'll leave you to wrestle with that one. Verse 5 again. "Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What then do you say?" Well, in verse 5 here, I have written down a whole bunch of stuff. If you look in Leviticus 20, 10 and 21, that can be applied. And Deuteronomy 22, 22 and 23. Okay? I'm just going to read what I wrote down here. It says, "Here the Pharisees were misapplying Moses' law. Stoning was meant to apply to a betrothed girl before her marriage. Where is the man? Where is the man? Is the girl just, is she some sort of a victim, or is this a two-sided deal? There's an old saying, it takes two to tango, doesn't it? What happened here? Why didn't they drag the man in there? Where's he at? One of the commentaries I read, suggested that possibly he could have been one of the scribes. He could have been one of the Pharisees. After all, and we'll come to this in just a minute, after all, would he want to be revealed? How did they know? If you think into this problem, we're getting there on this. How did they know? Verse 6, "They were saying this, testing him so that he might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped and with his finger wrote on the ground." And here's one of these great mysteries. No one knows what he wrote. Some manuscripts leave this part out. Okay? Verse 7, "But they persisted in asking him. He straightened up and said to them, Who is he who is without sin among you? Let him be the first to throw a stone at her." What was he saying to them? What was the part that would convict these people of what they're saying? You there, without sin, we'll let you throw the first rock. You up to the task? What if he just happened to point to the guy that was with the girl? Can you imagine that situation? You there, you're guilty of it. I am too, but I don't nobody know that. How do you think that girl would think? What do you think your Creator would think? Remember, at the end of our days, everything is seen. So, we'll go back and reread this again. "They were saying this, testing him so that they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down with his finger and wrote on the ground. But when they persisted in asking him," they were persistent. They weren't relentless. "But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. How quiet is it in here? What do you think that crowd was waiting for? What do you think the scribes and the Pharisees were waiting for? You think maybe the silence might have been as loud as a thunderclap? Because what is the crowd? What did Jesus just ask? Where's the witness? And in essence, what he's asking for. Because when you're reading Leviticus, it requires it. And if I remember right, also in Deuteronomy, it requires a witness. Where's your witness? You guys that are twisting Scripture. Come on, let's hear the answer. Come on, come on. Scripture's pretty thunderous when it says this. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones. And he was left alone, and the woman where she was, in the center of the court. Again, Scripture is quite specific, in the center of the court. That one in the center of attention right there on that woman. Forget about the other participant. This is the one you got to get. Come on, come on. How are little children being taught these days? All sorts of things, huh? But don't pay any attention to what this teaches. This has been proven to be nothing. It's no good for you. It provides restraints. We can't have any restraints in our society. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, the ones that should have known the most. Of the wisest of people in here, I'm not going to point out anyone specific, but I consider that person to be quite wise. Makes good choices. That's one of the things that wisdom brings with you. Hopefully you make the right choices. That is a benefit of growing old, especially if you can keep your mind intact. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and he was left alone. And the woman, where she was, in the center of the court, straightening up, Jesus said to him, "Where are they? Where are they?" Simple sentence, simple question. What's the answer to it? They're gone. The accusers are gone. Nothing has happened to you. Why? Because they knew Scripture, but they also knew they were twisting Scripture to make it fit a situation that would have been completely wrong. How do you handle that for someone that's quoting Scripture when they say, all you got to do is believe? You don't have to do anything else. Once you believe, you're done. How do you square that with what Peter told the crowd in Acts when they asked, what must we do to be saved? There's this thing, juxtaposition. You put the two right head to head with each other. Which one wins out? Okay. Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you? She said, no one, Lord. And Jesus said, I do not condemn you either. Go from now on. And he gives her a good piece of advice. He tells her, don't do this anymore. Sin no more. Now, let me ask you, how hard would that be for anybody sitting in this room? For anybody anywhere in the world? Sin no more. Every one of us has our own little thing that troubles us, that we know is not right. What stops us? Hopefully this thing will stop us from time to time, at least slow us down a little bit. Does that not seem reasonable? Does that not seem right? If we took the time to read all the Scripture on this, it gets more elaborate, especially Leviticus and Deuteronomy. But that's the short of it right there. Because would Jesus have been right to pick up the stone and beat her over the head? You adulterous woman, I'll fix you. You'll adulterate no more. But instead, what did he do? I do not condemn you either. Because what was he talking about with this word either? Scripture. Because Scripture said you got to have a witness. They couldn't produce a witness. So, would Scripture have been valid if they'd have gone through with the stoning? One word separates things for us. Either. I do not condemn you either. Oh, this is in John 8. This is verse 11. Yeah. Either. Now, I don't know what some of the other translations may read, but I'm reading from the New American Standard, and this is what it says. What if Jesus had have done the wrong thing with Scripture? That's exactly what the Pharisees were trying to do, is trip him up by some misuse of Scripture. And if he would have ever done that, what would have happened? I suggest to you, none of us would be sitting here. History would have ceased to exist as soon as Jesus messed up. See how important it is to be able to read, understand, comprehend, and put into use. And he tells all of us, from now on, sin no more. I'll stop there. If there's anything I've said that's wrong, in error, please let me know. Thank you.